They said no child should face the night alone. Yet here she sat at the crossroads, clutching a scorched doll in trembling hands. Jonas McGraw, once a proud cowboy, now a broken man riding nowhere, carried only a pistol and a bottle to end his journey. But fate is cruel. His own blood had betrayed him long ago, and now the shadows sent killers to finish what sorrow began. Then, a sound cut through the wind, soft, fragile like hope, daring to breathe where hope should not exist. Because sometimes, at the darkest hour, the crossroads don't take you, they show you the road back to a soul you thought was gone forever. They say the West remembers every man who loses his way, but some nights, the West does more than remember, it judges. At the edge of Dry Creek, one broken cowboy thought his ride was ending. Instead, he stumbled into a story that would tear open his past and offer him one final chance at redemption. If you're watching, stay with us. This is no ordinary tale. Share where you're listening from, or subscribe if you've ever wondered whether even the loneliest rider can find his way home again. Because at midnight, fate waits at the crossroads. The prairie stretched under a sky heavy with stars, vast and cold, the kind of silence that felt carved by time itself. Dry Creek's faint lanterns lay miles behind, a ghostly smear of light swallowed by the dark. Here, the world narrowed to wind and shadow. At the fork of two forgotten trails stood a wooden cross, weather-beaten and leaning, planted long ago for a traveler whose name no one remembered. The moon poured silver over its crooked edges, throwing a broken shadow across the dust. The wind moaned through dry mesquite, rattling branches like brittle bones. No coyotes howled, no owls stirred. The night seemed to hold its breath, waiting. And into that stillness rode Jonas McGraw, a man who carried silence heavier than any saddlebag. Jonas was 61, though the years weighed far older. His tall frame had hollowed, shoulders sagging like timber gone soft with rot. A coarse gray beard clung to his jaw, rough and uncombed, streaked with the stains of whiskey. Beneath the brim of a battered hat, his hair once raven dark-hung matted, threaded thick with dust. His eyes, smoke blue, seemed dulled from too many nights staring into bottles instead of horizons. He wore a long coat, frayed at the cuffs, patched where bullets and bar fights had once marked him. The revolver at his hip still gleamed dully, polished by habit more than pride. In the saddlebag knocked a bottle, half empty, sloshing with every stride. Once Jonas McGraw had been a name spoken with respect. Fastest draw in Copper Plains. The kind of man men followed into danger and women whispered about behind shuttered windows. But pride, whiskey, and rage had stripped him bare. His wife had left. His daughter had vanished into the wind of another town, another life. Years later, the letters stopped, and so did hope. Now, the only companion left was Raven. The black stallion was scarred across the flank, one eye clouded from a fight with time itself. His breath came heavy, mist bursting white in the cold night. Each hoof dragged, but he walked on, stubborn as his master. Together they looked less like cowboy and horse, more like two survivors too proud to collapse. Jonas's plan was simple. Ride to the crossroads, take the bottle, take the bullet, end the trail where no one would care to look. The wind shifted as Jonas reined Raven to a halt beside the leaning cross. He dismounted, boots crunching against gravel, knees stiff from age and regret. He pulled the bottle free, lifted it to cracked lips, let the burn coil down his throat. His other hand brushed the revolver's cold grip. Tonight would be clean. Tonight would be final. But then, a sound cut through the stillness. At first, faint, a trick of the wind. He froze, listening. It came again, sharper this time. A cry. Not animal. Human. Fragile. Jonas stiffened, heart hammering against ribs that hadn't known urgency in years. Raven snorted, ears flicking toward the sound. Jonas squinted into the darkness. The cry rose again, thin, trembling like glass about to break. His hand fell from the pistol. The bottle slipped from his grasp, shattering on the stones. Whiskey bled into the dirt. He stepped forward, boots dragging, as if some buried instinct pulled him where willpower would not. There, by the roadside ditch, the moonlight unveiled her. A child. She sat curled against the weeds, knees hugged to her chest, arms wrapped around a doll whose face was blackened, half melted by fire. Her dress clung in tatters, her hair once pale hung in ash-streaked tangles across her face. She couldn't have been more than 8. Her lips were cracked, her cheeks smeared with soot, yet her eyes, wide, green, unblinking, pierced the night with desperate clarity. Jonas froze. For a heartbeat, he saw not the girl before him, but another child, his own. A fevered daughter clinging to a rag doll, begging him not to ride away that night long ago. He had ridden anyway. Duty, anger, pride. He couldn't even remember which one had owned him then. But when he returned, she was gone. Lost to time, or to him, it no longer mattered. The memory struck harder than any bullet. His throat closed, breath ragged. The girl shivered, clutching the scorched doll tighter. Jonas knelt, joints grinding, the cold biting deep. He stretched out a weathered hand, calloused and trembling, unsure if he meant to comfort her or beg forgiveness. But before his fingers touched her shoulder, the night erupted. Hoofbeats thundered in the distance. Not Raven's weary shuffle. These were fast, furious, too many to count. The ground quivered beneath their rhythm, and riding with them, harsh laughter, jagged as broken glass, carried on the wind. Jonas's blood ran cold. The girl's eyes widened, reflecting both the moon and the terror. The crossroads no longer waited. It demanded a choice. Jonas's hand hovered above the child, the cries of strangers on horseback rushing closer, laughter slicing the night. Raven reared, nostrils flaring, and Jonas realized his ending would not come by his own hand, not tonight. Hoofbeats thundered in the distance, cruel laughter cutting the night apart. Jonas's hand hovered above the trembling child as Raven reared and snorted clouds into the moonlight. Fate had judged him. His end would not be by his own hand. He dragged the girl to her feet. "Move," he hissed, voice low and ragged. Together they stumbled off the trail into the shadows, the noise of riders chasing the wind behind them. The prairie stretched cold and endless, but Jonas knew the land. Half hidden among thorned mesquite stood a shack, abandoned years ago, leaning like an old drunk against the dark. He shoved the door open, wood groaning, and pushed the girl inside. It was no home, only splintered boards and sagging beams, but it would hide them. Jonas pressed his back against the door, revolver in hand, listening. The hoofbeats faded past. The laughter dissolved into the night. The girl's breath came in shivers. She clutched the scorched doll tighter, her green eyes staring at Jonas as if he were both salvation and danger, and he realized this night was far from over. Moonlight bled through the gaps in the planks, striping the floor in crooked silver. Dust hung thick in the air. A broken chair slumped in one corner, its legs snapped. A rusted stove leaned sideways, the pipe long gone. The smell was of rot and old rain. Jonas crouched, boots creaking, watching the girl. She was filthy, her hair a nest of ash-blonde tangles, face streaked with soot. The dress she wore was torn at the sleeve, fabric burned at the hem. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, but it was her eyes, green, raw with fear, yet unyielding, that fixed him. They were not eyes of a child expecting rescue. They were eyes of someone who had already seen too much loss. She hugged the doll closer, voice trembling but steady. "My name's Abigail." Jonas gave a slow nod. His throat felt dry. "Where's your kin, girl?" Her lips cracked as she spoke. "Dead." The word hung heavy, more ash than sound. "The men? They came with red scarves. They wanted Papa's horse. Mama tried to stop them. They shot him. They laughed." Her small hands clenched around the doll until the charred fabric strained. "I ran. Mama told me to. She said if anything ever happened, I should run to the crossroads. She said someone would find me there." Jonas's jaw tightened. The crossroads, the very place he had chosen to die. Now this girl claimed it as the place of her salvation. Abigail's voice dropped, almost a whisper. "I hid in the hay shed." I heard Mama scream. Then it stopped. I wanted to go back, but I couldn't. Her eyes locked on his. "I ran like she said. And I saw you." Jonas felt his chest knot. He had seen death in saloons, on dusty streets, in the eyes of men who drew faster than they should have. But he had never seen it so close to a child. He wanted to look away, but couldn't. His hand shook as he holstered the revolver. "You're safe now," he muttered, though the words felt empty. Abigail shifted, the movement pulling loose a scarf knotted around her neck. Jonas's gaze caught, froze. The fabric was old, frayed at the edges, but he knew it instantly. Deep blue plaid, stitched with a crooked star in one corner. His breath caught. He had last seen that scarf decades ago, around the shoulders of his daughter, a daughter who had vanished into silence, leaving him with nothing but guilt. Jonas's hand rose, trembling. Where did you get that?" Abigail's voice was soft, but the words cut through him like a blade. "It was Mama's. She said it came from someone she wanted me to know. She said your name once. Jonas." The name, spoken by a child, fell heavy in the rotting shack. Jonas staggered back, the walls tilting. His name, carried through blood he did not yet understand. The scarf trembled in her hands, the crooked star glinting faintly in the moonlight. Jonas stared, throat dry, heart pounding louder than the hoofbeats had moments before. "Your mama," he forced the words out, gravel in his voice. "What was her name?" Abigail blinked, eyes brimming but unyielding. She whispered, "Anna." The name struck him like a bullet. His daughter's name. The revolver felt heavy at his hip. The room seemed to shrink. Could it be? Could this child, sitting shivering before him, be his own blood? Jonas's hand fell to his side. His breath came shallow. The crossroads had not brought him death. It had brought him a question that could tear his soul apart. The shack fell silent, except for the girl's fragile sob, and Jonas knew nothing would ever be the same. The crooked star on Abigail's scarf still burned in Jonas's mind. The name she whispered, Anna, struck him like a bullet that refused to kill. Could this child, small and trembling in the moonlight, truly be tied to the daughter he had lost? The shack walls held their silence, but outside, the prairie was far from still. Jonas knew they couldn't stay. He rose stiffly, joints aching, and pulled Abigail to her feet. "We ride," he muttered, voice gruff but edged with something deeper. Her green eyes flickered with confusion, but she obeyed. Raven pawed the dirt outside, weary yet restless, as if he too sensed danger had not passed. Jonas set Abigail in the saddle, climbing up behind her. The night pressed heavy, the stars sharp as broken glass overhead. The trail to Dry Creek stretched long, but he had no choice. He would get her there, whatever shadows followed. And in that decision lay the weight of redemption. They moved at a steady pace, Raven's hooves muffled against the dust. Every rustle in the mesquite made Jonas tense. He scanned the horizon, revolver heavy on his hip, every sense sharpened by the memory of red scarves and cruel laughter. Abigail leaned against him, silent at first, but then whispered, "Mama, she used to say your name." Jonas's breath caught. He kept his eyes on the trail. What did she say? "She called you the father I never met." Her words were soft, yet they struck harder than any outlaw's bullet. Abigail clutched the doll to her chest as though drawing strength. "She said you weren't bad, just lost. She said maybe one day you'd come back. But you never did." Jonas's jaw tightened, his throat raw. He wanted to speak, to explain, but words crumbled like dust in his mouth. The past was not a story he could tell a child, not tonight. "Hold on," he said instead, spurring Raven faster. The truth would not protect her now. The night split with a shout. From the darkness behind, hooves thundered, growing louder. Raven tossed his head, nostrils flaring. Jonas pulled Abigail close as two riders emerged from the shadows, red scarves flashing in the moonlight. The first was a hulking brute, broad shoulders filling the saddle, face carved with an old scar that ran from temple to jaw. His beard was wild, streaked with gray, his eyes dull stone under the brim of a sweat-stained hat. His voice bellowed across the night, "McGraw!" The second was leaner, younger, but with a cruelty sharpened by hunger. His black beard caught the moonlight, his grin wide, teeth glinting. A rifle rested easy across his saddle, as though it had lived in his hands since birth. They were predators, and Jonas knew it. The big man raised a pistol. "Hand her over, old man!" Jonas drew fast, his revolver cracking once, the sound shattering the silence. The shot tore splinters from the outlaw's hat brim. Raven lunged forward, but a bullet whined past, grazing Jonas's shoulder. Pain exploded, hot and sharp, spinning him in the saddle. Abigail screamed, clutching his coat. He gritted his teeth, firing again. Sparks burst off the second man's rifle barrel, forcing him back. Raven stumbled but pushed onward, hooves drumming a desperate rhythm against the trail, but the outlaws pressed closer, their laughter slicing through the night. Another shot rang out. Raven shrieked, his body jolting beneath them. Jonas felt the stallion shudder, then collapse mid-stride. The world tilted, dirt, sky, and stars spinning. Abigail's scream tore the night apart. Raven crashed to the ground, blood dark against his black hide, legs buckling beneath him. Jonas hit hard, the pain in his wounded shoulder roaring. The revolver slipped from his grasp. He scrambled, reaching for Abigail, but the girl was already on her knees, hands pressed against Raven's neck, sobbing. And behind them, hooves slowed, circling, the outlaws closing in. The Crossroads had brought Jonas a child, a ghost of his past. Now it demanded blood. Raven's scream still split the night, hooves buckling as his massive body crashed into the dirt. Abigail cried out, clutching his mane until Jonas dragged her clear. The stallion lay heaving, blood darkening his flank, the sound of outlaws circling close in the shadows. Jonas's shoulder burned from the bullet wound, but there was no time to grieve. They had to move or die where they fell. Jonas pulled Abigail to her feet, his jaw clenched in pain. "On your legs, girl," he growled, voice low but urgent. She stumbled, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks, yet obeyed. With one arm tight around her, Jonas forced his body forward into the scrub brush beyond the trail. Behind them, Raven struggled. The old stallion pushed up onto trembling legs, blood dripping from the wound, each step a battle. Jonas glanced back once, meeting the horse's clouded eye. Even half dead, Raven followed. Abigail gasped. "He's hurt. He can't—" Jonas cut her off, voice breaking. "He'll follow as long as he can." "So will we." The prairie swallowed them in shadow. Branches tore at Jonas's coat as he staggered on, shoulder slick with blood. Abigail clung to him, small legs stumbling to match his stride. Behind, the outlaws cursed, voices rising like wolves baying for blood. One fired into the night. The bullet hissed past, tearing bark from a mesquite trunk. Jonas ducked, pressing Abigail low to the ground. The girl whimpered, but Jonas whispered, "Quiet. Breathe." His own breath came ragged, chest tight, but he kept moving. When the gunfire paused, Jonas crouched behind a ridge, pulling Abigail close. Her green eyes caught the moonlight, wide and shining. For a heartbeat, Jonas froze. They were the same eyes, clear, piercing as the daughter he had lost decades before. The memory surged, a little girl with those same eyes begging him not to ride away. He had left anyway. And now, fate had brought him another child, carrying the same gaze, the same unspoken plea. Jonas's throat tightened. He reached up, brushing soot from Abigail's cheek with his rough thumb. "You've got your mother's courage," he whispered, though part of him wondered if she also carried his own blood. Shouts rose behind them. Two riders crested the ridge, moonlight striking red scarves at their throats. The first was the brute Jonas had seen before, broad as a bull, scar slashing down his cheek. His breath steamed heavy, pistol raised, eyes gleaming with the hunger of a man who killed for coin. The second leaned lower in his saddle, lean and wiry, with a grin that glistened sharp in the dark. His rifle gleamed in his hands, steady as death itself. The brute bellowed, "McGraw, you can't run forever. The man who paid us wants your blood more than the girl's." Jonas stiffened. The words sliced deeper than the wound in his shoulder. Jonas shoved Abigail behind him, revolver drawn though his hand trembled. "What are you saying?" The wiry man chuckled. "The girl's family was a bonus. You're the prize, old man. You're the one marked. Name's McGraw, ain't it? That's who we were sent to bury." The brute's grin widened. "Past has a way of catching up, don't it?" The truth hit Jonas like a hammer to the chest. These men weren't hunting Abigail's kin. They were hunting him. His sins had dragged her into this hell. Jonas staggered back, revolver lowering. Pain flared hot in his shoulder, but sharper still was the guilt gnawing through him. He clutched his chest, breath ragged, as Abigail gripped his coat in terror. The girl's small voice cracked the silence. "Jonas, what do they mean?" He couldn't answer. He couldn't bear to. The outlaws spurred their horses closer, guns glinting. Raven stumbled into view, sides heaving, blood soaking his black hide, but still standing. The stallion let out a defiant snort, refusing to fall. Jonas's vision blurred. He realized the truth in horror. It wasn't Abigail's misfortune that brought death to her door. It was his. His past had bled into her life, pulling her into a storm she never chose. He dropped to one knee, clutching his chest as the pain seared. Abigail clung tighter, sobbing, and Jonas whispered hoarsely, "God forgive me. I've cursed her with my name." The night closed in, the riders circling like vultures, as Jonas bowed under the weight of both bullet and truth. The prairie night held its silence for only a moment, and in that silence, Jonas McGraw felt the weight of his own sins crush his chest harder than the bullet wound in his shoulder. He had learned the truth. Those men weren't after Abigail's family alone. They were after him. Every step he had taken, every cruel choice in a long life of whiskey and violence had led to this. The girl clung to him, sobbing, too young to know she had been dragged into a man's damnation. The crooked post of the crossroads loomed ahead, warped and splintered, its shadow falling long across the dust. It had been the place he chose for death, but fate had chosen it for judgment. The outlaw's horses thundered close behind, red scarves flashing like drops of blood in the moonlight. Jonas tightened his grip on Abigail's small hand. "No further," he rasped, voice raw. He pulled her to the side of the trail, forcing her behind the crooked post. His revolver gleamed dull in the moonlight as he lifted it, every muscle in his arm screaming with pain. Abigail pressed her back to the wood, clutching her charred doll to her chest, whispering prayers too broken for heaven to hear. The first outlaw dismounted, boots crunching the dirt. He was broad and scarred, face twisted by years of violence. His pistol glinted. "End of the trail, McGraw," he growled. "Boss wants you cold, and I'll see him paid." The second outlaw circled, lean and sharp-eyed, his rifle steady. He grinned with cruel delight. "And the girl?" She screams once, maybe twice, then silence. Quick work. No one remembers a brat Jonas's blood turned to fire. He raised his revolver and fired. The bullet tore sparks from the brute's belt buckle, driving him back with a curse. Gunfire erupted in the dark, bullets hissing past, splintering the wooden post. Abigail cried out, crouching lower, covering her ears. Jonas staggered, shoulder aflame, but held his ground. Raven, the black stallion, stood a few yards away, sides heaving, blood dripping dark and steady. His one good eye fixed on the outlaws, ears pinned back. He had followed Jonas through storms, fights, and wasted years, but tonight the horse seemed to understand this was the last stand. The brute lunged forward, firing again. Jonas fired back, the shot grazing the man's arm. The wiry outlaw swung his rifle toward Abigail. Jonas's heart seized. He tried to step into the line of fire, but his wounded leg buckled. Then Raven moved. With a sound torn between a scream and a roar, the horse surged forward despite his wounds. His body crashed into the wiry outlaw, knocking him from the saddle. The rifle fired wild, bullets sparking harmlessly off stone. The outlaw hit the ground hard, cursing, clawing for his weapon. Raven's hooves lashed out, striking sparks, forcing the man to roll aside. Abigail gasped, eyes wide, tears streaking her face, but her voice broke through. "Raven saved me!" The brute roared in rage, raising his pistol, aiming at the child. Jonas saw it all in slow motion, the barrel gleaming, the brute's finger tightening on the trigger. His revolver was empty. His body was failing. But he still had one choice left. Jonas hurled himself forward. He stepped between Abigail and the outlaw, arms wide, chest bared. The pistol fired. The bullet slammed into him, tearing through muscle and bone. The shock stole his breath, but he stayed standing for a heartbeat long enough to see Abigail's green eyes, wide with horror, staring up at him. He thought of Anna, his daughter, lost to him, and in those eyes he saw her again. He dropped to his knees. The world dimmed, but he reached out, bloodied hand finding Abigail's small one. He gripped it tight, refusing to let go. "Chase combat con la nua," he whispered, his voice no more than a ghost carried on the wind. Abigail sobbed, clutching his hand with both of hers, pressing it to her cheek. Raven staggered, sides lathered in blood, but still stood guard, ears pinned, teeth bared against the circling outlaws. The brute cursed, fumbling for another shot, while the wiry outlaw dragged himself back to his rifle. But the girl did not look at them. She looked only at Jonas, the man who had chosen death once, now giving life in its place. The crossroads was no longer a grave. It had become the altar of redemption. The night held its breath as Jonas swayed, his body heavy, his lips still forming words no one else could hear. The outlaws closed in again, guns raised, shadows stretching across the dirt. Raven pawed the ground, ready for one last charge. Abigail clung to Jonas's hand as if by sheer will she could hold him in the world. And the moon looked down coldly, silver light spilling across the bloodied ground, bearing witness to the price fate demanded. The night had nearly swallowed him whole. Jonas's hand, slick with blood, still clung to Abigail's tiny fingers, though his grip weakened with every breath. His whisper lingered in her ears. "I will never leave you again." A promise torn from the edge of death. She bent low, pressing his hand to her cheek as tears streaked across the dust. Around them, the crossroads was a graveyard of silence. Raven stood a few yards away, chest heaving, legs trembling. Blood streaked his black hide, but his eyes, dimmed yet defiant, remained fixed on the horizon. He would not fall so long as she stood there. Then, faint at first, came the sound. Hoofbeats in rhythm, voices carried on the cold wind. Abigail lifted her head. Lanterns bobbed in the distance like wandering stars. Relief swept through her small frame as the glow grew brighter. The outlaws, hearing the approach, cursed. Their red scarves flashed once in the moonlight before they spurred their horses into the darkness. Cowards to the last, they left nothing behind but dust, smoke, and fear. Abigail held Jonas tighter. "They're leaving," she whispered, though Jonas's eyes fluttered half shut, his body too broken to answer. Moments later, riders arrived. At their front was Sheriff Elias Ward. The sheriff was a man molded by years, on the frontier, broad-shouldered but thick at the waist, hair silvered beneath his hat, a beard flecked with white framing a face line deeper than dry creek beds. His eyes, sharp beneath heavy brows, softened when they landed on Abigail clutching Jonas's body. His long duster coat swayed as he swung down from the saddle, boots striking dust with the steady weight of authority. He knelt beside Jonas. "Sweet Lord," he muttered, voice low but steady. He pressed 2 fingers against Jonas's throat. For a heartbeat there was nothing. Then faint, fragile, he felt life. His eyes narrowed with grim resolve. "Still with us." Abigail, trembling, buried her face against the sheriff's coat. "Please," she sobbed, "don't let him die." Ward wrapped a steady arm around her shoulders. His hand was rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle. "You've got grit, girl," he said softly, "and so does he. We'll see him through the night." Behind him, the townsfolk dismounted, lanterns casting yellow light across the dirt. Men and women gathered, their faces shadowed with sorrow. They saw a child too young to bear such grief, an old cowboy broken by wounds and years, and a horse that stood battered yet unyielding. Jonas stirred, groaning through clenched teeth. His eyes opened a sliver, finding Abigail. "Still here?" he rasped. Her tears spilled anew. "I'm here." "I won't leave." Ward ordered bandages torn from shirts and shawls. Hands worked quickly, pressing cloth against Jonas's chest. Each touch wrung a grunt from him, but his jaw locked, refusing to cry out. Raven faltered, stumbling to his knees. A murmur rose from the crowd. Abigail broke free from Ward and ran to the horse. She cupped Raven's muzzle with both hands, her forehead pressing against his. "Stay, Raven. Please, stay." The stallion's breath rattled, but his ears flicked toward her, and with one final surge, he pushed himself upright. He would not surrender while she begged him to live. As dawn's first light broke across the horizon, Sheriff Ward drew Abigail aside. His eyes, weathered and kind, studied her face, those piercing green eyes so achingly familiar. "Child," he said carefully, "what was your mother's name?" "Anna," Abigail whispered, clutching her doll. "She told me once, if I was ever lost, I should find Jonas. She said he was my grandfather." Ward's head bowed, a shadow passing across his face. "Anna McGraw," he murmured. "I knew her. She came through this town years ago before sickness took her. Brave girl, with your same eyes." He laid a heavy hand on Abigail's shoulder. "That makes you Jonas's kin. His blood." The child's breath caught. Tears welled again, but they were different now. Tears of recognition, not just grief. She turned to Jonas, who lay pale as the dust but whose eyes flickered open at her touch. "Did you hear?" she cried. "You're my grandfather. You're not alone. You're mine." Jonas's lips parted, voice faint, threadbare, but carrying the weight of redemption. "Anna, my girl. She lives in you." His eyes glistened before drifting shut again. Ward looked down at him with a steadiness born of sorrow. "He'll live," he said firmly, though his tone carried truth's weight. But this wound is his to bear until the end of his days. The townsfolk fashioned a stretcher from spare wood and saddle leather. With great care they lifted Jonas. Raven limped beside, his gait unsteady, every step a testament of loyalty. Abigail never let go of Jonas's hand. They carried him as the sun rose higher, painting the prairie gold. Dry Creek's rooftops shimmered in the distance, glowing like a promise. When they arrived, people poured from homes and shops, eyes wide with shock and reverence. They saw Jonas McGraw, once a shadow of regret, carried not as an outlaw but as a man who had faced death and chosen life for another. They saw a child's fierce devotion and a stallion's defiance against the grave. Days passed. Jonas lingered between life and death, but each morning he woke, tethered to the world by Abigail's small hand in his. His body was ruined, breath shallow, strength fading, but he endured. Raven, too, healed slowly, his proud frame marred, but his spirit unbroken. On the 7th morning, Jonas whispered to Abigail, voice cracked but sure, "I thought I'd lost everything, but at the end of the trail, I found you." Her smile broke through tears. "And I found you." Outside, the streets of Dry Creek stirred with life. Sunlight poured over barns, homes, and the church steeple. Beyond the town, the crooked post at the crossroads still stood, weathered and splintered, marking the place where death had been expected. Yet it no longer felt like a grave. It felt like a monument. Jonas McGraw, once a man who rode alone into the dark, had found dawn. He bore the scars of his past, his body broken beyond repair, but in the child's eyes he had discovered forgiveness, family, and grace. Raven stood tethered outside, head high, as though guarding a future that might yet hold peace. And for the first time in decades, Jonas no longer dreaded the trail ahead. He knew it would end one day, as all trails do. But until then, he would walk it not alone, but hand in hand with the grandchild fate had returned to him. At the crossroads where he had sought death, he had found life. In the end, the crossroads was never about death, it was about choice. Jonas McGraw came to that lonely place ready to surrender, yet through the cry of a child and the loyalty of an old horse, he found something far greater than escape. He found family, forgiveness, and the courage to keep walking, even on broken legs. Sometimes the hardest trails don't lead us away, they lead us home. And now, dear friends, I'd love to know where this story found you. Share in the comments where you're watching from, and if this tale touched your heart, subscribe so you won't miss the next journey waiting on the horizon. Because every crossroads holds another story worth telling,